It was supposed to be a beautiful beginning, but in the quiet corridors of Windsor, beneath the gentle rustle of royal curtains, it almost became Princess Charlotte's worst nightmare. Picture this: Princess Anne, the most unshakable of them all, caught in a rare moment of emotion. Her hands trembled as she held a single document. Tears welled in her eyes, not for herself but for a child. That child was 9-year-old Charlotte. What Anne had discovered wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a betrayal, one so personal, so deliberate it shook the very walls of the palace. Because this wasn't just about Charlotte's diary being leaked, it was about her trust, her confidence, her innocence, being targeted, and not by strangers. No, this trap was crafted from within, by someone who knew her schedule, her teachers, her friends, even the language she used in private moments with her parents. William was livid, Catherine was devastated, but none of them saw it coming. How do you tell a child that someone meant to guide her may have been the one to humiliate her? And the real question: who would want to sabotage a child? A royal child? And why? Was it jealousy? Was it revenge? Or something far more dangerous? A warning? What Princess Anne uncovered, it changed everything. And for Princess Charlotte, it was the moment her world stopped being safe. Now, we must ask, was this just a one-time attack? Or the beginning of something darker, something threatening the next generation of royals? Subscribe our channel US British Secret for more video. Princess Charlotte has always had that unmistakable royal spark, a twinkle in her eye, a poised little wave, and a natural sense of grace that reminds many of her grandmother Diana. Still, only 9 years old, she's already capturing hearts across the world. She's witty, charming, and carries herself with a quiet confidence that feels far beyond her years. But more than charm, Charlotte holds weight. She's not just the daughter of the future king, she's third in line to the throne. And with that title comes pressure, especially now, as the royal family carefully begins shaping her public identity. For months, royal aides had been preparing her for a special charity event, her very first official solo engagement, a children's literacy program where Charlotte would read to young students and help launch a new initiative supporting underfunded schools across Britain. It was a moment designed to symbolize the new generation stepping forward. Youth, grace, and royal duty wrapped into one. But behind the scenes, all wasn't as peaceful as it seemed, because while Charlotte was stepping into the spotlight, another figure, older, steadier, and battle-worn, was watching carefully: Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, daughter of the late Queen, and the one person within the monarchy who still upholds the old codes without apology. Anne has always been the no-nonsense backbone of the firm. No scandals, no whining, just relentless duty. Even now, at 74, she continues more engagements than nearly any other working royal. And it was Anne who first noticed that something about Charlotte's debut didn't feel right. Some might call it instinct, others might call it experience. Either way, she knew. You see, the palace has changed. Queen Camilla, once the outsider, now commands subtle but undeniable influence behind palace doors. Her presence has reshaped dynamics in ways the public rarely sees. As the spotlight begins to shift from Charles and Camilla to William, Catherine, and their children, tensions have quietly grown, and not everyone inside the gilded walls is comfortable with that shift. So when Charlotte prepared for her big day, what no one realized is that someone had already decided to sabotage it. Princess Anne isn't the type to overreact. She's seen too much, endured too long, and survived enough royal storms to know when something feels off. And this time something was off. It began with little things, too little perhaps for anyone else to notice. But not Anne. She was visiting Clarence's house when she first spotted it. A junior aide, one she'd never seen before, ducked out of a room the moment she appeared. Another flinched when Anne asked a simple question about Charlotte's schedule. And then there were the changes. Small, quiet changes to Charlotte's prepared itinerary. The reading time had shifted by 30 minutes, no explanation. The media setup was rearranged. Anne had helped coordinate royal events for decades. She knew how carefully every detail is planned, and she knew how dangerous it could be when those details start to move without reason. Then came the conversation. Anne had stepped into a hallway unexpectedly, looking for a staffer she'd worked with years before. That's when she heard it, two voices behind the door, barely above a whisper. She won't even know what hit her. They'll blame it on nerves. Anne stopped, listened. Another voice. It's perfect. Just enough to embarrass her publicly. That'll slow things down. silence, then laughter, and didn't burst in. She didn't confront. She simply walked away. But something inside her had shifted. That cold, unmistakable sense that something cruel had been set in motion. Quietly, carefully, she began asking questions, not to security, not to the press team. She went to her old contacts, people who owed her favors. She requested a copy of Charlotte's engagement brief, cross-checked who had handled her wardrobe, pulled a list of technical crew assigned to the media area. That's when the inconsistencies started to stack up. The dress Charlotte was supposed to wear, tailored weeks in advance, yet when it arrived, it was too tight in the shoulders and bunched at the waist. The bouquet prepared for her to hand out at the children's center, suddenly replaced by a much larger, heavier arrangement, one difficult for a child to carry, and the microphone she was meant to use for her reading. Anne tested it herself. The volume was set dangerously low, barely audible, enough to make Charlotte strain her voice in front of cameras or worse, fumble and panic. Anne's heart tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography, a carefully threaded humiliation designed to unfold live, and no one had caught it, except her. Princess Anne had seen enough, but nothing prepared her for what she uncovered next. Late one evening, long after the palace halls had quieted, she requested the final version of Charlotte's speech, the one the young princess was to read during the engagement, and as she sat at her desk, reading line after line, her heart dropped. It wasn't just advanced, it was impossible. The speech was filled with political jargon, literacy metrics, and unfamiliar idioms no child would naturally use. Phrases like intersectional accessibility and targeted socioeconomic uplift, terms even she had to read twice. This wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't an overzealous speechwriter trying to be clever. This was intentional and clenched. The pages. No one had seen the final version, not even Catherine, who had assumed it had been simplified, child-friendly. Charlotte had practiced a very different draft at home, but this version, it would trip her up within the first few lines, and it didn't stop there. Anne dug deeper, tracing press contacts scheduled to attend. She discovered directives had been quietly issued. Photographers were told to focus on candid shots of Charlotte. Emphasize real moments, they said. Capture authentic emotion, they added. But Anne knew what that meant. If Charlotte faltered, if she paused, fumbled, or heaven forbid cried, those images would be splashed across front pages within hours. A young royal breaking down, a symbol of fragility, not strength. It wasn't just sabotage. It was cruelty, and it was directed at a 9-year-old. That night, alone in her private office, Anne broke. The woman who had stood like steel beside her mother for decades. The one who had held firm through Diana's death, through scandal, through abdication rumors, sat down at her desk and wept. Not for herself. Not even for the monarchy. She cried for Charlotte, for the little girl who had come to her days earlier, eyes gleaming, dress half-fastened, proudly holding her note cards. I practiced extra, and Anne. Mummy says I'm ready. That memory crushed her, because Anne now knew the truth. Charlotte had been set up, not to succeed, but to fail. And the worst part, no one else saw it. William and Catherine were abroad finalizing an overseas initiative in Northern Europe. Charles had stepped back temporarily due to health concerns. Camilla? Anne knew better than to involve her. This wasn't a matter for royal protocol. It was something deeper, something darker, lurking within the cracks of the institution. She was alone, and time was running out. The event was less than 48 hours away. The press kits had been distributed. The speech had been finalized. The trap was ready. Anne wiped her tears, stared at the fireplace, then stood. There was no one else to turn to, no approval to seek. If she didn't act now, Charlotte would walk into that event and walk out humiliated. And that was something Anne simply could not allow. Chat Gap said, Princess Anne didn't sleep that night. She didn't pace. She planned. By dawn, her strategy was in place, not impulsive, not explosive, but precise. She knew how the palace operated, how fear could work faster than orders, and how sometimes subtlety cuts deeper than confrontation. Her first move was simple but intentional. She summoned the royal engagement coordinator and 2 senior aides to her private drawing room. Her tone was sharp but calm. Her questions, surgical. Walk me through Charlotte's appearance, she said. No emotion, no accusation. The aides fumbled, spoke in generalities, dodged details, and pressed harder. When the speech came up, she cut them off. I've read it. Explain to me how those words suit a 9-year-old girl." They froze. A silence followed, heavy and charged. She didn't reveal what she'd overheard, didn't accuse them outright, but her message was clear. "I know, and I'm watching." The effect was immediate. By mid-morning, corrections were quietly initiated. The floral arrangement was scaled down. Charlotte's original dress, properly tailored, was restored. A second microphone was arranged and tested twice, but Anne wasn't finished. She personally reviewed the entire press list, something she hadn't done in years. Names she didn't recognize were flagged. 2 photographers with tabloid TIs were abruptly removed. No explanations. No room for protest. Anne didn't need to scream. Her presence was enough. Behind the scenes, panic rippled through staff. But the Princess Royal moved with a calm ferocity that left no doubt this was her operation now. And then when the palace quieted for lunch, Anne sat down with a pen. She rewrote the speech herself, line by line. She shaped words not for a headline, but for Charlotte. She kept the heart of the message: literacy, hope, helping others, but added words a child could understand. Simple, strong, sincere. She even included a small joke Charlotte had made during tea last week. A little moment, just for her. Something to help the young princess feel safe. When the new draft was done, Anne had it printed, folded neatly, and placed in Charlotte's favorite lilac binder, the one with the tiny crown sticker on the back. But just as Anne was leaving the speech room, she ran into someone unexpected. It was Dame Lorna Harwick, a senior advisor recently appointed to the Queen Consort's private office, and her expression? Polite, but tight. "Princess Anne." She nodded. "I wasn't aware you were involved with this particular engagement." Anne didn't smile. She looked directly at her. "I wasn't," she replied coldly, "until someone made it necessary." "Dame." Lorna hesitated. "Is there something you're concerned about?" Anne tilted her head, then leaned slightly closer. "I've already addressed it." The moment stretched, but then something flickered in Lorna's eyes. A flicker Anne had seen before. Recognition and fear. Camilla hadn't been named directly in anything Anne had found, but 2 of the press changes, the bouquet substitution, and the speech rewrite, had all been quietly approved through the Queen Consort's team. It wasn't proof, but it was close. Anne knew better than to escalate. The monarchy survives because its conflicts stay indoors, whispers behind heavy doors. Still, as Dame Lorna stepped away, Anne made one final decision. She would be at the event, not just watching, but standing behind Charlotte, visible, calm, and strong, because no child, no royal should ever be made to feel small to serve someone else's agenda. Anne would ensure that Charlotte's moment wasn't a trap, but a triumph. Chat Gap said. The event unfolded flawlessly. From the moment Princess Charlotte stepped onto the small stage, clutching her lilac binder, to the moment her final words rang out clear, proud, and full of joy, it was everything the palace had hoped for, and more. Cameras flashed, children cheered, and the world saw a young royal step into her light with grace. What they didn't see, what no one saw, was the danger she had so narrowly escaped. Charlotte had no idea. To her, it had simply been a magical day. She had read her speech, giggled at her own joke, and handed out books with all the elegance of a seasoned royal. She had shown, and Anne stood in the background, stone-faced as ever, but with a small warmth in her chest. She had saved her, without reward, without credit. Behind palace walls, however, word spread. Not through memos or meetings, but through glances, nods, and quiet acknowledgments from those who understood what had been averted. Some aides began referring to her, hushed and half smiling as the shield. A few of the conspirators, gone within the week. One reassigned to a distant Commonwealth outreach. Another quietly retired. No statements, no stories, just shadows, disappearing. But Anne knew the real cost wasn't just theirs, because something in the air had changed. Tension began to thicken between her and Camilla. Nothing said outright, nothing open, but when they passed each other in corridors now, there was no smile, no nod, just silence. Anne wasn't one to seek conflict, but she wasn't one to avoid truth either. She knew power had shifted in recent years. She had accepted that, but she would not accept watching a child be used for games, politics, or petty control. And Charlotte? She bloomed in the weeks that followed. Her confidence grew. Public appearances felt easier. The press adored her natural spirit, and the public saw in her a hopeful glimpse of the monarchy's future. They wrote about her eyes, her smile, her poise, but no one wrote about Anne. That night, after the event, Anne sat alone again. She looked at the original speech still tucked in her drawer. She thought about what might have happened, about Charlotte freezing, stumbling, crying, about how a single moment, broadcast across the world, could have changed the course of a little girl's confidence forever. She closed the drawer, took a breath, and whispered to no one, "Not on my watch." Chatgap said, "Princess Anne has never sought the spotlight. She doesn't wear emotion on her sleeve. She doesn't need headlines to validate her. And yet time and time again she becomes the quiet force holding the monarchy together, not with grand speeches, but with action, with instinct, with love." Watching Charlotte that day, walking confidently off stage, clutching a book in one hand and waving with the other, Anne felt something deep within her stir. Not pride in the institution, but pride in her, in the girl who had no idea how close she came to humiliation, to heartbreak, to being turned into a pawn. Anne had stopped it, this time, but as she looked around at the familiar faces, the polished smiles, the carefully calculated glances, she couldn't shake the unease. Because this wasn't a single act of mischief. It was orchestrated, premeditated. It had passed through to many hands, been approved to quietly, and nearly succeeded, undetected. If Charlotte, a child, isn't safe from palace intrigue, what does that say about the future of the monarchy? And then there was Camilla. Nothing confirmed, no fingerprints, just whispers, alignments, approvals that never should have been granted. Was it her? Was it someone close to her? Or is there something deeper, something darker still at play within the palace walls? Anne doesn't know for sure, but she knows the game, and she knows it's far from over. Still, she watched as Charlotte ran up to her after the event, glowing with joy. "And Anne, did you hear? They laughed at my joke." Anne smiled softly. "I did. You were brilliant." Charlotte beamed, skipping off, her braid bouncing behind her, and Anne stood still, holding that moment, knowing the child had no idea how close she came to falling and how deeply someone had cared enough to catch her. The monarchy may wear a crown, but sometimes its greatest protector wears no jewels at all.